Well, for quite some time now, the Ministry of Education has been seeking to not only meet the general demands of public school education in the Family Islands, but ensure that the same level of education is provided nationwide. While there have been some challenges, a move's underway to amalgamate a number of schools on those islands. Joining us on the morning edition to discuss these changes is the District Superintendent for the South Central Bahamas District and Chairman of the Amalgamation Committee, JEROME Forbes. Welcome, Mr. Forbes.
Good morning. Thank you.
Now, before we get into jump into the amalgamation, share with us some of the key challenges facing the education system in schools in the Family Islands.
Good morning again. One of the major challenges we face on the Family Islands is the diminishing populations. We no longer have the volume of students we once had on these islands, and persons have relocated or come to the city for many reasons, mostly to seek a better education, to seek a better form of employment. And so when parents move to the city, they bring their children along with them. So when a school would have had 150 students or 200 students, those schools in some instances are down to 20 or 25 students. And so with diminishing population of students, it's difficult to now send 20 teachers to teach the 20 students. So we have to now look for teachers who can teach multiple subjects so that students on every island could have access to a quality education. We also have issues with teacher retaining them on the Family Islands. And every department has some impact on the way a teacher may view a Family Island experience. Basically, if a teacher is sent to a Family Island, their concern may be medical reasons for me or my children. How can we have access to proper medical facilities in the case of an emergency? Maybe not a life-threatening emergency where an air ambulance may have to come or air emergency may have to come for them. But on a daily basis, in the city, you can just walk to the clinic or walk to the hospital if you feel a headache or you feel your heart is not beating right. On a Family Island, you wake up on a Monday morning and don't feel too well. You may have to wait until 3 days later to catch a flight out in some instances, or a week later in other instances. And so when sometimes teachers see these issues on Family Islands, they become fearful of residing on those islands.
That said, then, what is being done to ensure adequate teachers are on the Family Islands? What provisions are being made?
Right. So what we're doing is, when in instances where we cannot find a teacher for a particular subject, we're now offering that subject to the students virtually. So in instances where students need access to the 9 PJC subjects, that means we will require 9 teachers. If that school has 17 or 19 students, and teachers, it may be difficult to send teachers to those islands, we can now teach the subject virtually using the virtual school that was implemented this year to try assist us with giving students a quality education despite what the number of students in that school may be. And so we are retaining the quality even though the quantity is diminishing.
Now, aside from the virtual school, that brings us to the amalgamation. How exactly does that work? Because I think it brings to mind what we had some years ago, many years ago, I would think, with all-age schools.
Right. All-age schools is one of the options that we have. If we go back historically, I would have attended an all-age school during my upbringing on a Family Island. And so in an all-age school, historically, these schools were sometimes taught by 1 or 2 teachers. And sometimes all the students were in the same room in some instances, so if we go further back. And there's one teacher had to teach every student in every grade level in that smaller school. What would happen was that principal or the head teacher would select the brightest child in the class, what they call a monitor. And that student would be responsible for teaching their peers at certain grade levels. So if I was the smartest child in grade 5, the principal would allow me to teach my peers in grade 5. And what that head teacher would do, probably after school hours, he would give me the classes that I missed because I was now teaching my peers. When we look at 2020, definitely because of the way education has evolved, we can no longer use that method. But in those days, there was a school in every settlement on the family islands because, number one, students would walk to school. There was no school busing system at the time. Students would go home for lunch at lunchtime, as I would do, and then go back to school when you had a bell ringing because the schools were in the community. And as time changed, we realized that we can no longer have one teacher in one school. Why not bring these schools that are close in proximity together? And so by doing so, we were able to now, instead of having one teacher, you bring two schools together. You now have two teachers. You bring three together, there are three. So now those three teachers can now teach the combined school. When we look at also historically, we were looking at all age. And if you remembered, we would have developed into the Central Secondary, the Admiral Ferguson High School in Crooked Island, which was originally called the Colonel Hale High School, the Crooked Island High School, was our first central secondary school in the Bahamas. That was the first school that was used as an experiment on the family islands to see how grades 7 to 12 would operate on those family islands. With the success of the Admiral Ferguson High School, we now had other educators like Mr. Carlton Roll in South Cat Island, who his duty was to bring the students in the southern part of Cat Island over to the Old Bight High School. And so what he would have done, he would have said to the parents, I'm now going to be the head teacher of this high school. And what he did, he allowed all the uniforms in the southern portion of Cat Island to be the same, so that even though you're amalgamating the upper portion of these schools, still the transition became easier. And the same thing happened in Ackland's Central High School with Mrs. Glenda Miller, who was called to amalgamate and formed the Ackland Central High School. We had the same thing in Mangrove Key, where Mr. Joseph Roma was called to form the Mangrove Key High School. So all of these are examples of pioneers in education who would have been the teachers on these islands, the head teachers on these islands, and they were told by the Ministry of Education, we're now upgrading, we need to form high schools or central secondary schools on these islands, and they were the pioneers. So we moved into the central secondary part of it. Even though we moved into the central secondary part of it, the population now continues to diminish. It's diminishing at such rapid rate that we can no longer have 6 or 7 schools. So it was amalgamated and it moved from 20 schools for 20 settlements. We brought it down to about 10. In some instances, we have 6 schools on an island. When we look at the diminishing population, we now saying that we still have to amalgamate further to allow us to.
I'm sorry,
Right.
when you think of bringing schools together, what other changes are required to make this happen?
Right. We require transportation will change. So students are now coming from different areas of the island to the amalgamated school. And so what we will do, we will go into these islands and we host town meetings. We have a consultation with the public, and we present options to them in terms of the way forward for the students on this island. So one of the options would always be the comprehensive or all-age school. And so the all-age model will be one of the options, but we will say, let's bring all of the students together into the all-age. For example, in Miguana, we have 2 schools remaining. Those schools were amalgamated in the past, and it remained 2. This year, we are presenting the option to the people of Miguana, to the stakeholders in Miguana, that we now have to find a way to amalgamate these 2 schools, the Pirates Wells, primary school with 23 students there, and Abrahamsby High School with the 17 students there. By bringing those two schools together, more than likely at the Abrahamsby High School, that school can now cater to the preschool to grade 12. It will give us more teachers now the students have access to, because in those schools we have the generalists who can teach straight across the curriculum. We have the physical education teachers who can teach K to 12. We have the computer teacher who can teach K to 12. We have teachers who are trained as generalists who can teach science at the primary school and at the secondary level. So what we're looking at is if we can maximize our resources, we can do much more for our students.
Well, again, thank you so much, Mr. Forbes, for joining us on the Morning Edition. There's more to come on the other side of this break.